I like when people overshare on the internet. It's one of my personal favorite things because that's how we know all sorts of vital information in this day and age that we would have not known before. That's why people know about gentle parenting. That's why people know about like cause and effect. That's why there's so many people on this planet who how do I put this? There are people who get online and tell really descriptive, sad signs that a child is being sexually abused. Like this woman, she talked about how her lips were always red with sores around her mouth. And because, when she was being molested as a child, she would try to bite down on her mouth as much as possible to try to stop her perpetrators from getting in there. Or because, usually that was the reason why. Or because, she was getting violated in her sleep. So her mouth would be red and raw from their private areas and I don't want to say too much, but, it's like it's brutal, it's descriptive and disgusting, but she was a child. He was a child. All the people who make these stories were children who grew up into adults, and it had a massive effect on their life and their upbringing. And I'm glad they share it so I can know signs, okay? Because I know that when I was a child, multiple things about me did not get caught. Like OCD like tendencies got entirely ignored. Obvious signs of abuse were pretty much fucking ignored. Signs of like bullying and mental decline and like other certain mental conditions that I'm not just in the mood to disclose right now, but let's just say even certain mental conditions that I'm pretty sure I have, I'm getting closer and closer to figuring out what it is I have, because there are people out here like there's someone on the internet like, oh hey, I have this mental condition where it feels like I take back seat to whatever I'm doing, and a second person just like takes the wheel and the rein on my life for a certain period of time as a coping mechanism. And it's like, wow, that's fascinating. Like I get to hear all these different, because how do I put this, I like people should know more about each other. Some people argue we should know less about each other. I disagree. I appreciate that there are people out there with like OCD, maladaptive daydreaming, schizophrenia, narcissistic personality disorder, autism, all that, sharing about their experiences. Otherwise, you will not fucking know. Because guess what? I share about my experiences often, and because of that, people usually open up about theirs. Some people see it as a red flag that one of my favorite things to know about a person off the bat is some terrible shit that happened to them, but to me, it's because sure, we could have small talk. Anyone can talk about the weather. We've been having crazy weather lately. It was a 2-day heat wave, and now there's a fucking rainstorm that just came in like that. Within fucking 10 minutes of me eating lunch, it just came in like that. But guess what? So sometimes there's not like rare, you could talk about the weather every day or have the rare storm. But for me, I care about the storm that's going on inside of someone. Because I remember I was on this dating show. One of the topics I talked about was how my favorite thing is to know like someone's deepest, darkest secrets, or something that they went through that was like, you know, that impacted them heavily. Why? Because that kind of fucking changes your life forever as a person. It does. In scary, terrifying ways, especially if it doesn't get checked sooner. And then, funny enough, at the same event, I made friends with a girl, and one of the first things we talked about, like after a little bit of talking, we talked about her experience with like witchcraft and spiritual science and stuff. But another thing is, she talked about how she had been sexually assaulted and how she was coping with it and all that, and the guilt she felt. And we bonded over that because I've also been sexually assaulted. It's really fucking rough. And it's like, you don't, like, it's one of those complex things where just a lack of justice and shame, guilt, sadness, fear, all of that. And I met her from what I forget which month that was. That was before the Mitchell incident, but still, I was glad that I met her. And it felt cathartic. It was a catharsis. We talked about it, we bonded. And of course, we bonded over other things too, but it kind of felt like a temporary solace in a thick fucking monsoon where you have a little bit of cover and safety before you have to go back out and deal with it all alone. I think it's important because how do I put this? Generational trauma is something I very much care about. One of my favorite books is this book that we read in high school called The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde. It was made by, what's this nigga's name? I believe it's by the name of Juno Diaz. But some people don't like it because it talks about like the perspective of like several generations of family. Like one generation, like most of their family got murdered in a fucking massacre by a dictator. The second generation after, one of the sole survivors, like she was raised in a fucking community where she was ostracized for her skin color and her trauma, and she didn't get to process any of it healthily. She kind of got, the only way she survived the massacre was because one of the members of her family, like, literally paid someone to keep her safe. Just for the people who were paid to keep her safe, gave her away to like this random Asian family as they lived in, I think it was Colombia or the Dominican Republic, I forget, I apologize. And then afterwards, she was just getting horrifically abused. Like, they threw a whole fucking pot of hot burning oil all over her back as a small fucking child. Like, she was so young. And she went through so much. So my guess is she, over time, developed some sort of like narcissistic tendencies. Why? Because think about it. If you live a life where you think no one cares about you, you're going to start only caring about yourself as a survival mechanism. And even if it's unreasonable, even if you lash out, anything, because you need to survive. That's what everybody wants to do at heart. And then in the story, it talks about more things she went through. Like, she got involved with this other guy who was kind of powerful, not quite a dictator. I think he was some sort of like drug lord or whatever. One thing led to another. The drug lord's wife found out that she got knocked up, paid some gangsters to beat the shit out of her and assault her and leave her for dead. She just barely escapes to another country with her fucking life. Meets a guy who sees this like 19-year-old who's vulnerable with her teeth knocked out, covered in bruises, with big tits, and he takes advantage of her. But, not in a rapey way, but in a, ooh, you know what? Like, he saw her as a target. And then he got her pregnant and abandoned her. So there she is in a new country, new life, with children suffering. And she obviously was not the best parent. And then it talks about the generation that we know next. The so-called Oscar Wilde character, whose real name, the real boy's name is like named something like Oscar de Leon or something like that's the name of the main character of the story. Like, he's the third and final generation, and he's the real main character of the book. And for that one, I don't know, the story I think is very well written. It translates very well about like generational trauma and how shit can follow you, how turmoil can really manifest and come in many different ways and change the course of someone's life and how they go about things forever. And I think it's very fascinating. There's also another video game called What Remains of Edith Finch. I like that one a lot for very similar reasons. You get to learn about how all these kids came from the same fucking evil bitch, Edith Finch, and how all of them came to be. And one thing led to another. And the tragic way that most of the people in the family sadly died. It's all very, very sad. But I will say this, I don't know. I like when people share stuff that's vulnerable. I remember I dated a young man. His name was Patrick. I call him Patrick number one because he was the first Patrick I dated, but he also, he low-key was kind of the best one, but like, that depends on which race you would rank him among the Patricks I've been with. And I know that his mother was not the nicest to him. Certain things in Patrick, like his arrogance, his cockiness, even the way he viewed sex and women, it all tied back to the way his mother treated him. His mother was the type to like hit him in the face, punch him in the face. Didn't matter if he was 5, punch him in the fucking face. Gaslight, dismiss, all that. But at the same time, his mother loved me, so I would have conversations over dinner or lunch. We would talk for like fucking hours. I think the longest we talked was like 6 hours straight. From breakfast all the way to like late afternoon. It was beautiful and lovely, and I got to learn about her life, and I got to learn that it's like, oh, I see why she kind of was the way she was, because like her dad, when she was alive and a kid in the 50s or a teenager or whatever, her parents were fucking evil. So compared to the shit she did to Patrick, she probably sees herself as a fucking saint. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it makes me understand certain things. And it's just sad. It's like her parents fucked up, then she fucked up, and now we have Patrick who's fucked up in a whole new interesting way because he had a shitty lame ass dad and a low-key like neglectful and really shitty asshole mother. And certain things popped up with him. I don't know. I'm just trying to say I always appreciate when people overshare. You can learn a lot about people and why they do the way they do. And it also can help you learn about your own development and what you can learn about in others. I've already mentioned before, it's why I like to research the lives of like serial killers or people who did certain crimes or people who got the rags to riches lifestyle through crime. You understand their perspective. Doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean that you have to agree with every single thing. But to an extent, you're like, okay, what happened and what signs can we look out for? And if you actually study certain things, you'll be like, okay, how? So we couldn't stop this one guy from losing his fucking mind. But at what points should paths have diverged very differently? So that then if you meet someone else and you're like, oh, here's a child who flinches every time you get close to them and has red sores around their mouth, and like you kind of understand, it's like, oh, that's not just a kid playing in its mother's makeup or with a little tick of biting its lip skin off. It's like, no, that's a child who sadly went through a very bad situation with an adult, and they need to be taken out of that situation. Like I mentioned before, I learned I was non-binary because someone just, out of years and years of people trying to accuse me of either being a chaser or being nosy or gross or dismissive or weird or invasive, someone finally was respectful enough to answer my fucking questions. And then guess what? I got to learn things about being bisexual and being non-binary, and it opened my fucking eyes. Because closing yourself off and like cutting people off from knowledge does nothing. Do you want people to be ignorant, or do you want people to learn? I appreciate people who go out of their way to be vulnerable, you know? And whether it's comedians who find ways to joke about their fucked up past on stage, or people who are okay sharing photos and experiences of when they were hooked on crystal meth or cocaine or this or that. People who make subreddits even for fucked up shit, like whether it's how to recognize you're in an abusive relationship, or people who are side chicks and need to figure out how to leave those situations or why they got involved in them in the first place. Like, once I actually followed subreddits and read books and stuff on how narcissism worked, it made it so much easier to understand dynamics with my own mother, and that was how I was able to survive. People who shared their experiences on sex work and stuff, they made it very apparent, like all the risks and bad things that could happen, and that probably stopped a lot of young girls from being killed or robbed or hurt or falling for scams. People opening up about even the most embarrassing shit, like even if it's not even anything inherently traumatic, it could just be like a sad cringe story, but you know what, it makes me happy. In fact, I remember once on Reddit, someone online was like, oh my god, I can't stop thinking about like all the terrible cringy shit I did in high school, and it's keeping me up at night. And so I remember I told them, I typed out this story, you can probably find it. I said, hey, when I was in the 8th grade, after I, like, when I was like a very young child, in like 3rd grade, 4th grade, I saw an episode of Sweet Life in Zack and Cody where they said the reason Romeo called Juliet the sun is because he was saying that she was as hot as summer's day. And I made a vow to myself that it's like, if I'm ever in a position where I can make a joke about Juliet being as hot as summer's day, then I'm gonna fucking take it. And then years later, 8th grade, I remember my fucking English teacher. She was like, okay, so we see that in this scene, Romeo compares himself to the earth and Juliet to the sun. Why is that? Now, me, I already knew the real fucking reason. It was because he was trying to say she was a glorious, beautiful, warming light, blah, blah, blah. But to me, I thought to myself, hey, no one's raising their hand. And I did make a promise to myself that I would do this. And I don't fucking renege on promises to myself, even if I was a child. So I raised my hand, my English teacher called on me, and I said the words with direct eye contact, hooray, you're hot. And the whole class froze. And the teacher was like, what? And then I realized how that sounded. It sounded like I said my English teacher was fucking hot. And everyone was like, oh my god, the quiet bitch is a gay? And why is she, why is she flirting with the teacher? And it's like, imagine fucking like a whole big ass classroom of like 20 fucking 13-year-olds giving you many different looks of confusion, disgust, and bewilderment. Like, what the fuck? And then I realized how bad that looked. And then my English teacher was like, do we need to have a conversation after class? And it wasn't, And I was like, no, 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 that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. And I said, no, I was just saying Romeo's calling Juliet hot. And the teacher looked at me like I was the dumbest motherfucker alive and was just like, yeah, no. Anybody else? That's clearly not it. Anyone else? And I blushed like hell for the rest of the class. And it's been fucking a decade, and I still think about that. And I shared that story on Reddit. And I was like, just so you know, everyone has a cringe story like that. Those kids probably don't remember me, and it still haunts me a decade later. But you know what? The fun thing about life is that you fuck up sometimes. You tell cringe stories. You do dumb shit. You sometimes get a little silly or wacky with it, and you live past it and enjoy. And then you go through life and you make friends, and then you get to hear from your friends all the cringy shit that they have also said, all the mistakes they've made. And then you learn that, everyone has a story like that. And people have said shitty jokes or farted in front of their crush or had their period leak all over their white shorts or made stupid jokes, anything. And it's one of those things where it hurts like hell in the moment, but then a long time later you can just laugh at it. So feel good that you at least made memories and took risks when you could, and even if it failed, it still built you up as a person. And just think of it as you trying, and trying is always better than not. And they seemed to really appreciate that. They was like, wow, that actually made me feel 10 times better, thank you. In fact, another time on Reddit, a different account of mine, I remember this kid on the subreddit Intrusive Thoughts, he was talking about this chick he was obsessed with, who he kept contacting. Everyone else was shitting on them despite it being against the rules, but me, I was the only person to be like, hey, just so you know, I've been through this shit before. Trust me, I have. I've beaten niggas up on their fucking porch and broken their fucking glasses and made their nose bleed out of insanity. I've been the crazy bitch before. I've been the one waiting outside of houses and bushes. I've been the one sending hella texts from different numbers. I've been the one to be nuts. I know how that feels. But guess what? Now, I hardly remember that nigga's name. The beautiful thing about life is that in the moment you feel a lot of things. You thought you loved that person. You thought you cared about them. You really were hurt, but that's only because you're young. You did have a wonderful connection with them. Yes, of course you did, but it doesn't change that sadly, you'll realize that they aren't the first person you felt a connection towards, and they aren't the last. And sometimes you connect really well with people who sadly just aren't that good at heart. And then you'll meet people who you'll have better jokes with, better bonds with, even stronger attraction to you. And the best and most sad part about life is that you will keep meeting people who are better than the last. So just so you know, you're in the heavy part of feeling your emotions. It's really hard, it's ugly, it's tough, it's rough. But I can give you all the advice you need to get over this, but just so you know, you'll be okay. It's totally normal to feel your emotions and be upset and be angry, but just know it's not the end of the world, and I'm here for you, and my DMs are open. And actually multiple people reached out just to, I guess, show appreciation for how I handled that, and that was very flattering. It's good. That's what I really care about. Even yesterday night or so, on another social media platform, a girl was talking about how she was 19 and she broke the windshield of her fucking 29-year-old boyfriend's car after he nutted in her without her consent and all that. And I had to give the same little talk down speech to her, validate her emotions, let her know she could do a lot better. Because guess what? I've been through a lot in my life, plenty of times. And if I can use my bad experiences to potentially stop someone else from breaking some windows or going to jail or, I don't know, being known as a psycho, or at least handling it better and feeling recognized and loved in a way that I really needed back then when I felt so cryptically alone, then I find that necessary and beautiful, So yeah, that's what I think about. Shout out to the people who share. There's too many people who hide behind context and will never ever truly say how they feel or look at themselves directly and communicate, and that makes me sad. I like people who are willing to look at themselves in the mirror and know what they are and talk about who they are to other people so that other people can't be hurt the same way, so we know ways to grow and develop as people across generations. to stop generations of people from being hurt and harmed and miserable. So that, like, trust me. In fact, hell, another story. The guy I dated last summer, he was a cunt. But with him specifically, I remember he talked to me about his daughter being a furry and he didn't know how to handle that. So I told him, hey, when I was young, when I was like 9 or 10, I told my mother I thought I could control the weather. And, she could have easily had any sort of bad reaction, but she was like, oh, okay. Hey, okay. And I also told her I thought I was a psychic and stuff. And then one thing led to another. Let's just say I mostly grew out of it. It was like it never even happened. Like I was still a relatively normal kid. It was a phase. Even though there's other, well, let's not talk too much about it. Or I'll talk about it in another video. I just don't want to make this one too long. But let's just say we discussed the phase. And I said, my mother could have easily bullied me or harmed me or said anything awful. And it would have pushed me farther away from her. But instead, she let me talk through it, explain myself, and blah, blah, blah. And one thing led to another. And, like, it made a better bond between us. And it was totally a phase. And nothing bad happened. The world didn't end. So if your daughter wants to, and I also talked about how when I was 13, I was in chat rooms and traumatic shit that happened off of that. Like, predators, and also my abusive mother and family, and how that fucked me up for life. A decade later, it's still like, damn, bitch. But either way, I told him both stories, and I said, so the best thing you can do to your daughter, embrace her hobbies, even if you don't fully understand them, because it's just a phase. You can be a furry, but still have a totally normal friend group, totally normal life, a successful career. It's just like, and also she's like 9. It probably won't be a forever thing. And even if it is, it's like, okay, you got a happy girl who occasionally wears a tail or cat ears instead of like a depressed child who's on chat rooms and will be like, if you don't open your arms to your kid about certain things, even if you don't understand them, and give them space to, talk about things and address certain conflicts that they have inside themselves or things they like about themselves, then pedophiles are going to be the ones who will prey on your kid, or they will be in much more twisted situations. And he understood, and let's just say, yeah, he has a very happy fox daughter. And by fox daughter, I mean like a child who wears fox ears and a tail and like occasionally goes to the park to like practice how they jump. But they actually have a lot of friends and they're social and totally happy. Nothing bad has happened to them whatsoever, and they have a wonderful bond, and I'm very happy about that. And that's the beauty of life. Because if you hide these things, people will make mistakes and the history will repeat in the worst ways. I appreciate those who are willing to talk about even the heavy stuff. Because you could be saving a lot of people by opening up. Amen. Love you. God bless.